yeah, visibility is important, and I'm not gonna, I don't feel the need to be too quiet about it.
Welcome everyone to the Sports to Business podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Brian Vahaly, former top 100 ranked tenniser in the world turned CEO. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
So I think everybody's probably curious to know, how did you start in your career? How did you become a tennis player? Please walk us through that story.
Tennis was all I knew as a kid. So when I grew up, there was a local park down the street, and there was, swimming, and there was tennis. And I guess happened to see the movie Jaws at a very young age, apparently. And I was scared of the pool. So for me, tennis was my life. Every day, every afternoon, I went up and played. And, that was just part of my daily routine. And I think with time, as you get sort of better and better at it, it starts to fall into city tournaments and state tournaments and national and international. And, all of a sudden you sort of wake up at 14 years old and, I was in a bus in Italy, traveling and playing tournaments. So it sort of escalated a lot, but for me, tennis was, it was just part of my life. I started at 2 years old. So I really can't remember a time when I didn't have a racket in my hand in the early days.
And then how did the journey take you to university, where you really became one of the top players in the US?
Yeah, it was an interesting time. Back then, a lot of the players turned professional right away. I played right around the times of Ferrero and Leighton Hewitt, some top players, and I was ranked about 17 in the world at the time. And, for me, my family, education was always really important. Yep. And, the odds of being successful were really, small. So, made the decision. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to get my education. I wanted to have something to fall back on. You never know when injuries or some part is going to sort of sidetrack your career a little bit. So, made the decision to go to school, get my degree, which at the time was pretty controversial. There were no really college graduates out there on the pro tour, but the way I was raised for my family was something that had to be there.
And I guess that worked out pretty well for you after you did retire.
It was good. Yeah. It's funny. The pro sports world is so different than the juniors and the collegiate space. So yes, I was able to be successful in college and went out on tour. And a lot of people that I lost to in college were not successful on tour. So there really was no reason for me to think I was going to surpass them. But it really it's a lot when you're traveling 40 weeks a year. You're traveling by yourself. You don't have family. You don't have your college team. So you really had to be deliberate about it. And I think having an education helped me know that if I lost, that was okay. And it also helped me approach the pro tour very thoughtfully. And so I think that'll, sort of enabled me to be successful over time. And it was the right mix for me. It's not right mix for everybody, but we're certainly seeing more and more players now go through college in order to be successful.
It's almost becoming more like the football or the hockey, or not the hockey, but I think football or basketball, where you have to have a degree or at least 3 years before you can become draft eligible.
It's a maturity thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just at some point at 18 years old traveling, you can quickly develop the wrong habits. You can lose confidence. There's just a maturity that you need. And I think that was really helpful and impactful to me. And frankly, I had a business degree, so understanding finance, understanding accounting. I mean, you need to be careful. About 80% of athletes go bankrupt. And so for me, it was just, based on my personality, it was 100% the right move.
Yeah. So on your Wikipedia page, it says that after you retired, you went to the venture capital route. What was that like? How did the transition happen?
Yeah, it's tough. When you identify as an athlete for so many years, and at that time I was about 27, 28 years old, it's hard to sort of mourn the loss of that sport. I had to stop because of my shoulder, and it took me a while to get over that and figure out what I wanted to do next. But I think about, I tried to take those traits that I learned as an athlete, which was surrounding yourself with the right people and learning from there. So I really went on a hunt with who was going to be willing to take a chance on me. And I found some people in the private equity space who understood, who knew tennis, who knew what a tennis player is like. We're a unique breed, but when motivated properly and educated properly, I think can be a great, asset to a business. So, I just started trying things. I didn't know what I was going to be great at. I didn't know what in sports was going to make me successful, in the business world. So fortunate to have some great people, fortunate to try a lot of different jobs, because it probably took me 7 to 10 years just to figure out what the heck I wanted to do next, because I didn't know what life meant outside of tennis.
7 to 10 years. And, you know, I think nowadays, and just looking back I played college football and I was 23 when I left. There's this pressure that, hey, you're 23, you've graduated. Now I need to figure out my life right away, right? But here you're telling me you were 27, you retired. It took you 10 years to figure out what you liked, what you wanted to do. And you're doing pretty good. So I think for any student athletes listening right now, Brian, what would be your message to how do you approach that transition period?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing you can do, you know, when I have been approached, is put yourself in a position where you can get exposure to as many different types of jobs as possible. So I think about my time with my first company, you know, out of tennis, and, you know, I got access to the marketing team. I got to listen to what finance was like. I got to see what the operations were doing. I got to see what made sense to me, what I liked about what they were doing, what I didn't like. And I think in general, you know, you have to humble yourself back to the early sports days and just listen, work hard, and study. And so, you know, for me in those early days, I just exposed myself to so many, you know, different things, and frankly found my coach again. It looks different, it sounds different. It's not a formal coach, but it's somebody who you respect, who you know will watch out for you in your career and make sure that they're there to answer those questions. And I think you just have to be patient. And that is the hardest part. When you hit the pinnacle of your sport, you're used to being amazing and great at something. And, you know, we're back to square one a little bit, but you got to have confidence that if you could do it in sports, there's absolutely no reason you can't do it in business.
Yeah. When I left, my coach was like, you know what, Tender, you played in front of 40,000 people. You'll be fine as long as you practice the same principles that you practiced in football. And I think it's a patience thing, right? More or less.
Yeah, it's patience is the hardest part.
Yeah.
But frankly, also knowing, you know, I think sometimes as an athlete, I was intimidated by other of my classmates who just had education, right? And they had better grades than I did, and what felt like a higher IQ. And it's like, man, how am I going to compete? Now I can't compete with my body. I have to compete with my mind against these people. But what you never understood at the time was that ability to handle 40,000 people in the stands and the crowd and the pressure. The ability to make decisions under pressure is something nobody else has experience in. And so I quickly found what I needed to do was actually pull educated people into the room. I needed to hear and listen, you know, on great points of view, but really sports taught me about leadership and how do you listen, bring the right thoughts in the room, and ultimately have the guts to make the call. And I didn't realize what a gift sports had given me in that way. So again, it just was a little bit of time to see even, you know, people who were smarter than I am don't necessarily have the skill sets that sports taught me.
Yeah, you know, it's a funny story for me as well. About a few years ago, I looked back at my career, and I was in technology, but I did not have any tech background. So here I was, you know, managing apps for publicly traded companies. And I was like, you know, what is it that allowed me to move up so fast? And it wasn't like technology skills. It wasn't finance. It wasn't the hard stuff. It was my ability to get back up when I get knocked down, work with people, and surround yourself with great people, and also consistently execute day in and day out. It's simple stuff that works.
Yeah, and it was shocking to me that the rest of the world didn't know that, yes. Right? You have to do that in sports. You have to be a great teammate. You have to lose badly in front of people and humiliate yourself and go to bed at night and wake up knowing that tomorrow is a different day and it's time to execute. And so I just didn't realize, what a gift sports had given me in that way. And so as I watched people lose confidence, as I watched people struggle with failure, needing to blame other people, just sort of an inability to take ownership and accountability for decisions and outcomes. Gosh, I mean, I'm willing to do, I've been doing that for 25 years at that point. So that was never really the issue. And I'm not scared to put myself into a situation that's intimidating, because it is intimidating to walk onto center court of Australian Open and play Andre Agassi with the entire crowd rooting against you. It's massively intimidating, but if I can get through that and compete well, this stuff in business was nothing to me. So I I'm fortunate that, those experiences allowed me to continue to move up in my career when I frankly oftentimes had no business being there, but I knew that I had confidence in myself to figure it out, because that's sort of that's the baseline of sports, and knowing that you can get it done.
When you look back at your career in tennis, and you worked your way up in university and playing against all these big players, and then now here you're CEO of a massive gym, chain. What skills do you see yourself that you're like, what? Holy shit, that's the stuff that tennis taught me that is really saving my life right now. What are those 2 or 3 things for you?
Gosh, it's like, what does tennis teach you in all of this? It's the same principles for me. I mean, number one, you sort of recognize life's not going to be fair. Nothing's going to be handed to you, and there's going to be no shortcuts. So for me, it's a little bit of the planning principle. We've got to, what is the work that needs to get done in order for this team to be successful? How do I make sure each player on my team feels successful and has what they need in order to do it? I am prepared for the adversity that's coming. I'm sitting in the health and wellness space during a massive pandemic. It is incredibly challenging to lead through that, to instill confidence when all of that is happening. But ultimately for me, I think back to what made me successful in tennis. I'm not the tallest guy. I wasn't the most athletic guy, but I surrounded myself with amazing coaches, a great sports psychologist, a great physical therapist and trainer. And that made it easy for the rest to be successful. So as I think about being successful in the fitness space, or frankly, in leadership, I had to be incredible at talent assessment. Where do I find the right players for the right position in order for us to be successful? And so, I'm trying to leverage that the best I can, but it's, tennis inevitably finds its way through almost every day of my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. You said something which is very close to me, is building the right teams and the right players in the right roles, and you are only as good as your team is. So what are some things that you do on a weekly basis or daily basis to, one, keep your team together? But taking a step back, how do you actually build your team? How do you know who to hire? Do you have something that you will gravitate towards, values or cultural alignment? So what does that look like for you?
It's hard. It's always the trickiest part, because it's that is where oftentimes instinct comes into play. So as you think about the position you're hiring for, what are the two, if they could just do 2 things exceptionally well, and I'm very clear about focus and what is it, you can get distracted with a lot of noise in different positions, but there really is at times when you're strategically walking onto a tennis court or walking into a business room, what is it that those 2 things that they need to be great at? And once I know that, what is the experience that I'm looking for in order to feel confident that I can walk away and say, this person's got it, and I trust their instincts, because I can't be everything and I can't make every decision. So I need to know that there's somebody smarter than me in the role that I'm hiring for. And then, as it relates to culture, I mean, I think I'm an introvert. I'm pretty, I'd like to think I've got a decent EQ. And so I'm constantly trying to assess, is this person going to fit in with the team? Do they understand the sports team culture I'm trying to build? I'm not trying to build a family. This company that I recently took over had a very family-driven environment. Yeah. I'm a sports guy, so we're gonna have a team. And if you're not holding up, if you can't make it happen, we're gonna put somebody else in the seat. Yeah. It's very results-driven, which I think makes it more fair and less political in that way. But culturally, how do you know people are gonna get along? You gotta put them through everybody else in the interview process, get sort of buy-in across the board. But I certainly trust my instincts. If I think this person will, first of all, fit in, but second of all, what's critical for me, do they have the guts to speak up if they disagree? Because people who just are great at agreeing and not willing to shake the norm a little bit is very frustrating for me. I love when people say disagree, and I love when they've got great logic to back it. That's sort of my favorite characteristics of people to bring on teams.
Which makes your entire team that much better overall. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you better come with logic. I love a decision and I love decisiveness, but what's your logic? And I think if we can challenge each other's logic in a respectful way, better decisions come out of it. I've seen this in my football career, and I've also done this personally when I was working the corporate side. I tend to hire for potential and grit and where we're headed versus so much for experience. And just like, you see in the NFL, this amazing
young kid who doesn't have that much experience in college but has a potential, a coach will take a chance on him. What are your thoughts on that? And is that also something that you bring to the table as a leader?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, again, you have your personal experience, right? I was always told that I was never going to be good enough as a tennis player. I wasn't good enough at 12, at 14, 16. It's just consistently happening. And I always played the role of the underdog. So I love underdogs. I love somebody who is just willing to compete and fight to figure it out. And frankly, focuses on the details, knowing that that's what matters and that's what makes excellence. So do I love to invest in those types of people? Yes, they're probably my favorite. But I also have to recognize in a lot of these companies, as you move up in leadership, you have expectations to present to your board of directors, and they're not going to necessarily always wait. So while I can tell them, hey, I've got this great athlete who's going to get us there, what I typically like to do is make sure that they're mentored properly. So while they may be the future and maybe somebody who's going to replace their boss someday, for me, it's a little bit of a mixture of both. Because when you're dealing in the venture and private equity space, time is valuable. We're not building we're not going to assess this business in 15 years. We're going to assess it in 2 to 3. So we're sprinting. We're constantly sprinting, and I don't necessarily have that year to get that person up to speed. So long way of saying 75, 80% of the company I want with athletes. And frankly, I do hire a lot of athletes. They're my favorite folks to hire, but the top oftentimes, there's going to be certain positions where you just need experience.
Yeah, you have to have the right balance. And even let's say, you might be a great first year player on a college or football team. Coach is not going to put you in a position that you're not ready for. And that, I think, starts a leader. And that's exactly what you're saying is as a leader, you might have great people, but you also have to know, is this person ready? Can I put this person in front of 10 senior leaders, or are they going to rip this guy's presentation apart? Right?
And it's tricky. Listen, you learn a lot about your team with how they present up, right? So when you're presenting to your boss and you've got other teammates who are not showing up the way you want, or maybe you don't want them to present because they're scared that they'll be exposed. That's typically the first moment for me when I realize, crap, I might have the wrong player, and I might have to take a look. So but again, for the athletes that are out there, it's about finding somebody that cares about you enough to put you in the right seat and trust that they'll move you up when you're ready, knowing that you'll put in the hard work that they're expecting you to do based on your experience as an athlete.
You hit on something very, very valuable, I think, for our listeners, Brian. It's about failing, getting yourself knocked down, and then going to sleep the same day, knowing that the next day is a different day. How do you rebound from failure?
I learned very early that sleep is an incredible remedy. And so for me, to this day, I have horrible days at work, and I just think to myself, just get to bed. Because for me, part of my routine is how I think and what I say to myself the second that I wake up. And so there's a feeling of possibility. There's a feeling of hope. There's a feeling of hustle when I get up. That is, it motivates me. And that's sort of always been there. So I have a hard time recovering from failure. It eats at my soul when I either make a massive mistake or we're not winning. I hate not winning. But I also know sleep will help me recover. So that's just been something consistent for me through years of tennis, through years of work. You got to let it out sometimes and be miserable and be disappointed with yourself, but unacceptable to sort of wake up holding yesterday's bag. It's time to get up and it's time to compete. And I think most athletes get that because you just can't talk about last week's loss anymore. Like there's things to look forward to. There's things to push yourself towards. And frankly, what are you learning from yesterday's loss? Because there can be some great learnings from that. You're not going to get even better without losing. So, I've learned a lot from losing, probably more than I have from winning, frankly.
Yeah. I was talking to our head coach last week during our book launch, and he said, I asked him a question. I'm like, Coach P, what do you tell young kids, and how do you yourself continue going forward every year? Because we don't win every year. He says you're either winning or learning. That's it. If you don't win, you learn. And that's the exact same principle that you're saying, Brian, is that if you're losing, you learn so that you can win the next day. And I think a concept that's so important is to be able to shake off that feeling that you carry with you, take the learnings, and then move forward. it's almost like separate yourself from the results and look at it as a third person's point of view, which is what personally helps me identify.
It's so hard.
It's very hard.
It's very hard. And it wasn't until I had a coach early on sort of tell me, Brian, you're not that big of a deal. Meaning I just was so embarrassed by defeat. I was embarrassed by what I said, what I had done, how I showed up in that day, in that moment. And I would replay it in my mind so consistently. And my coach was sort of like, you're just doing that to yourself. Because let me tell you something, everybody else is thinking about themselves. So they don't care. It was interesting for 5 minutes to them and they've moved on. So why aren't you moving on? And I had to just learn how to, it just doesn't matter. Those things, and nobody cares. It's time to move forward. And if anything, given how painful this moment is, what are you going to do? What do you know now that you didn't know before that day started, so that we make sure this doesn't happen again? So we're constantly refining it a little bit, but it's, listen, losing's tough. I get the winning and learning, but I don't ever want to undersell the pain of just failure. It sucks. But I also find it to be very motivating.
It is absolutely, it's motivating that, hey, I lost today, but I'm going to come back and give it a best shot again. I think that's the attitude you need. And that's the attitude. Even if you fail again, at least you've made forward progress.
Yes.
And you've learned something about it.
You're not going to love the outcome of winning in a big stage until you've taken those hits. So I've also learned that piece. If it's coming too easy, you lose appreciation in a lot of ways. So it's, to me now, it just feels a part of it. I just expected a certain amount of days a year. I'm just going to get beaten up, and that's okay.
And then also, do you celebrate small failures deliberately? Like if you learn something from it, you failed, but you said, you know what? Even though I failed in the grand scheme of things, I still learned something about myself or about the business. That, hey, the effort was there.
Celebrate's the wrong word for me because I hate losing so much. Yeah. But one of the processes you go through for me is to sort of gain, what did I learn from it? And that becomes the sort of driving heart that like hits me in my soul a little bit to say, we are not going to have this feeling. I don't want this feeling again for this reason. And so it sort of burned it into my, into my mentality a little bit. So celebrate's the wrong piece because I never want to lose. But boy, what a waste of an opportunity to not learn from it. So I try to take that as sort of the chicken soup piece of it. Was I glad that I was sick? No, I'm not celebrating that I was sick, but let's get clear on what the medicine is.
How do you block out the distractions that exist nowadays? When you were an athlete, there were, cell phones, but you weren't getting pinged every single minute. You weren't on Instagram. We weren't in this hyper connected reality now. It's very distracting. Your phone's going off every second. You're worrying about what people are going to say. And it gets really tough, especially as you move up the ladder in business. What is something that you do today, Brian, that helps you stay focused?
I am very cognizant of what the phone can do. So I will tell you, I turn my phone upside down and turn it off for periods of the day so that I can really focus. I don't think you can achieve a high level of focus with constant notifications. So I'm very sensitive to the sensories, the environment I put myself in. So I would say that's sort of one. Listen, I'm a tunnel vision kind of person. I remember very clearly what it's like to be on the court and to very much focus on what's going on and what's right in front of you, and that's it. So I don't struggle with focus that much. If I'm in it and if I'm in a meeting, I'm giving somebody 100% of my time and attention. So, the focus part when I'm in the moment is fine. And then for me, it's all about like, what do I expose myself to? For example, I was on Facebook 7-8 years ago. It was not serving me in the way that I knew was beneficial to myself personally or professionally. I cut it. So I just had to know there were certain moments where I was like, this isn't good for me anymore. I'm either judging myself, judging others, wasting time. And there's just better ways to do it. So, to me, you just have to be very deliberate about what you put in your life, the people you put in your life, the content you put in your life. But I also believe one of the things that makes athletes great is the ability to tune things out. But you gotta get back to doing that. At sports, you don't have a chance to check your phone or do anything. You're just out there competing. Yeah. So take that principle and bring it into work. And you got to learn to tune everything out for periods of time. Again, let's do an hour and 15 minute sprint. Let's take a break. Hour and 15 minute sprint. Mm-hmm. Let's take a break. We don't need to expect us to achieve at a high level all day long, but you got to think about your rhythm and suit the business world to that rhythm. And that took me a while to understand. I often felt like breaks or training, even just going to the gym, was somehow a waste of time, and it actually made me better at my job. So I didn't want to lose sight of the benefits of staying in shape.
That's very interesting, because as an athlete, you have these buckets: training, film study, rest, recovery, and they are as equally or maybe more important than actual training. But when we get to the business world, and I've been, myself, I feel this every day sometimes, especially during slumps where I'm not feeling too great. I'll start realizing that, hey, I've stopped taking the breaks that I needed. I've stopped taking care of myself, and all I'm doing is working, thinking that I'm going to make progress, but it's actually hurting me. So is this whole thing about hustling every single day, 15 hours, 16 hours a day, I don't believe in that. But Brian, did you fall prey to that when you did come to the business world? And how do you make sure that you're only working for a certain amount of time, that you're most productive? How do you set it up?
Yeah, I mean, I made the mistakes, right? So to me, I felt behind as I joined the working world. So it was about, the constant marathon. My to-do list was a mile long. I prided myself on multitasking, the volume of work I could do at the speed with which I could do it. Inevitably though, as you move up the chain, you've got to be more strategic. You've got to be more thoughtful. You've got to assess data and think about decision making. And, you can't do that at a high level when you're constantly in marathon mode. And so, yes, do I wish I knew that at the very beginning and was a little bit more thoughtful? Sure. But again, I had some coaches more recently within the last 5 years who said, you got to read this book, and you have to recognize that you are serving your company by taking breaks. And when did you all of a sudden think recovery stopped? When did you somehow think just reading and learning and training stopped? You cannot be on this never-ending wheel. You're not going to elevate yourself. So I didn't figure that out right away. I just wanted to get things done. I think as you go through time, where you place your energy, both at a mental, spiritual, emotional, and physical realm, is something that I monitor very closely.
That's a great point. And for me personally, I look back in university, I would have practice, film sessions, workout, class, group projects. And I look back and I was like, you know what? I got more done when I was busier and spending less time on something, but with focus for an hour and a half and then shutting it off, versus what I've been able to achieve sometimes when I have the entire day to myself with no clear structure. So it just goes back to your point that go hard, know exactly what you need to focus on, and then shut it off.
Yeah, and study yourself, right? I mean, I'm telling sort of my passcode, which is an hour and 15 minutes, I am strong. But you stretch me into 2 hours, like, I'm gonna say some weird things, I'm gonna be tired, I'm gonna get irritable. I just need a second. And so really understanding the rhythm. Do I need to work out in the mornings? Is it during lunch? Is it in the evening? You've got to set up, to your point, structure. And when's your high profile, high times to really think? When's the time when you just want to do sort of administrative parts of your job? How do you best learn? You got to study yourself a little bit so that you can bring your best into, because if you really know how to manage yourself and surround yourself with the right people, it's really hard not to be successful. But oftentimes people aren't doing the work.
Question for you, Brian. In your bio, I read that you were one of the few openly gay players back in tennis, which is so great.
I'm the only one, not few, the only one. You're talking to one in the world.
One in the world, the only open gay player, and you've come to business, done pretty well. What has the experience been like, the transition, and also how do you make sure that diversity and inclusion is always front and center in your personal life as well as your business career?
Yeah, listen, that's a journey I could go on for hours about. Certainly being a gay athlete is extremely confusing and isolating, and at times made me, often wonder, am I an introvert or did I become one because of my sort of lack of comfort with myself in many areas? As I mentioned earlier, I've worked with a sports psychologist for over 20 years, and a part of that was making me more self-aware. I needed to learn who I was, the inconvenient parts of myself. I was dating a girl at the time. She was an actress. I felt like I was living the American dream, and then turns out you're stuck with who you are. So it was a long journey. The reason I have gotten involved in the space is a couple reasons. Number one, I've got two twin boys that are 5. and I want to create a world and an environment that is safe, healthy for them. And I want them to see me being proud of myself, being proud of our family. And, I think there's been a lot of movement towards the LGBTQ space over the last 20 years, but, I'm trying to push it a step further and talk about families and talk about what it's like to build a family of our own. Secondly, gay athletes that are out there, I didn't have a lot of role models there growing up. So I think continuing to just be visible so that people aren't feeling isolated. And then as I think about taking it into the business world, diversity inclusion is critical. Oftentimes gay, Black, no matter what your minority status is, you sort of have felt excluded at different times and either unable to get a promotion, unable to move up in leadership. You just didn't feel like you were part of that good old boys network. And so for me, running, being responsible for a culture in an organization is massively important to me. It's why I have a hire solely focused on culture. I'm not going to put up with discrimination. I'm very proud that, of my leadership team, 60% come from a diverse background. Amazing. So, I love it. I want to be sort of loud and proud about it, but, and just continue to provide visibility. There's just no reason for people not to be able to elevate and grow. And I want to be able to be an example of a successful, diverse leader.
I love it. I think the how you talk about it with so much passion, I think it's great, and we need more leaders like you in this world. So kudos to you, Brian, for pushing hard on this topic that we have to do a lot more on, and we don't do enough.
It is important, unless you've been sort of discriminated against, you don't know what it feels like. I'm not trying to, throw it in everybody's face. I'm not talking about gay things on every one of my work calls. It's a part of me. It's not every part of me. It's, at times I feel like I'm more an athlete than anything else, but if you really want to understand who I am, visibility is important, and I'm not gonna, I don't feel the need to be too quiet about it.
Awesome. Well, thanks for all the work that you do in this space. I'm sure everybody around
it's good. No, I'm working with I sit on the board of the US Open and the USTA, and diversity and inclusion is critical, and bringing more, folks to the tennis community and everywhere. So I'll stay involved.
Awesome. Last question, walk me through, what are you doing today as a CEO at YouFit Gyms? How's the journey been, and how can people learn more about the company and get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, so, website's youfit.com. So, the fitness and wellness space, as I mentioned, took a huge hit during COVID. And YouFit, the founder, was actually also the co-founder of Planet Fitness. And the sort of ethos and brand of YouFit is really about making fitness and well-being affordable and accessible for all. So, back in the days where gyms were so expensive to get in, having a $10 gym right around the corner was very exciting to me, because I love the fitness space. I love being able to have positive impacts on people. When we see more people coming to the gym, I think it's a great thing. So the company primarily has been based in Florida. We've expanded throughout the South, all the way over to Texas, Georgia, a couple locations up in Maryland and Rhode Island. There was a tough road in there. They went through bankruptcy during the height of COVID. So for me, I actually love walking into a messy environment. It's my favorite odd thing to do that I've learned about myself. I like to organize chaos. So for me, taking something from bankruptcy and bringing it back to its sort of former glory and inevitably make it more successful is incredibly motivating to me. I love the turnaround space. I flipped homes for fun back in my 20s. So for me, it's really exciting. It's exciting to see what the future's ahead. It's exciting to sit in the CEO seat. We're a tough and aggressive, a lot of athletes on our team, but we're very focused on affordable fitness.
Well, that's you sound like an athlete on the court.
Yes, it's not going anywhere.
That's awesome, Brian. And how can people connect with you personally, and where can they find more about you?
Yeah, so listen, you can find me at YouFit, and find me on email that way. I'm out there. I'm typically out roaming these gyms a little bit, but come hop on to youfit.com. You can find me somewhere on there. Send me a note, and happy to connect and chat. I'm always interested to talk to other athletes, and anybody who's looking to get in the fitness space. I'm always happy to have a conversation with them.
Amazing. Well, last week, I'm in Dallas. Actually, for the first time, saw a YouFit gym right about 5 minutes from my house.
I'll be in Dallas on Thursday.
There we go. All right. Well, thanks so much, Brian, for coming on the podcast. I think it was very, very insightful, but also very motivating for people. Thanks again, and appreciate it, and wish you all the best with YouFit and life.
Perfect. Thanks for your time.